We all service engine oil frequently, but what about your forks and your shock? Engine oil certainly gets changed with some degree of regularity using our owner's manuals as a starting point. Some are more fastidious than others, while some are quite manic in recording the number of hours they ride at per ride, and then calculating when the oil change will be. For engines, of course, we have a standard choice of dinosaur oil, a blend, or full synthetic. We also have different oils to choose from based on manufacturers' recommendations, the oil concoctions they use, and also, of course, the type of use and environments you ride in. All the information provided by the manufacturer of the oils is good, solid advice based on years of research and testing with supporting data. So, if you have a road bike, you might go 5,000 miles between oil changes. Is there a serious downside to it? I don't think so. What you need to know is what you need in terms of spec for the engine oil. 540, 1030, 1040, 1550. And you certainly go and buy what the engine is spec'd out as requiring based on your owner's manual advice. So let's flip that over. How often do you change motorcycle fork and shock oil? Let me ask you this. Do you think you should? Has it ever occurred to you that it must be changed? One very important question: are the service intervals for your forks and shock detailed in your owner's manual? No? Then why should you change your fork oil if there's no listed service line item telling you to do so? Same would apply from the shock, right? Nothing in the owner's manual doesn't need servicing. Everything else is there. Trust me when I say you are not alone with this quandary and knowledge void as a motorcycle road rider. Dirt riders have fork and shock oil services down in terms of frequency, but that information is commonplace amongst dirt riders. So, how did road riders somehow get left out? Well, fork oil changing frequency, same with shock oil, as a line item has long been missing in manufacturer's service documentation, and every service manager that I talk to has no idea why. However, that is definitely changing. In general terms, it makes perfect sense to remove old oil as its performance has diminished severely over time with heat and contamination. Forks and shocks move at a very fast rate, sometimes up to 2 meters per second. With some simple math based on a 300-mile ride, that's a lot of suspension travel over the duration of the ride. Factor into this equation that as the fork springs compress and relax, as they are internal to the fork, they flex against the inner fork tube surface, adding fine metal scrapings into the oil as well. Oops. So, over a given period of time, let's say 20,000 miles, you can imagine the amount of dirt that works its way through the fork oil seal into the oil, and the amount of metal debris added, plus the number of heat cycles the oil has been subjected to. There's not very much in the positive column there. The damping characteristics of old fork oil are very interesting in cooler weather. At first, it's going to resemble cold syrup or treacle, depending which country you're in, that'll make sense. Not easily stirred. Fork action will be minimal, abrupt, and therefore quite harsh. After 50 or so miles, the fork oil will begin to warm and change its flow characteristics, providing a little more suppleness to fork travel. That will improve considerably the longer you ride, but only to a point. If you ride for longer periods of time and or miles on your average bumpy roads, the fork oil will continue to get thinner and thinner, therefore returning the fork action to its earlier abrupt and harsh characteristics, but for a completely different set of reasons. Having consistent fork and shock action at all times via regular oil changes is therefore very desirable. So, how often should you change the fork and shock oil? To me, in all honesty, it's a question of conscience. It's just like asking how often should you clean brake calipers? Sure, you can ride 30,000 miles if you want to with the original fork and shock oil, but rapidly diminishing performance of your suspension is a huge risk factor. Not to mention the acceleration of tire wear that it causes because of less than optimal suspension travel and effect over the predominance of a ride. For the street, if you are aggressive with the bike, you should think about every 5,000 to 7,000 miles with the forks and every 10,000 to 12,000 miles for the shock. For track use, where there's significantly more risk, I would say change fork oil every 10 track days and the shock annually or biannually, depending on the number of days that you do. The manufacturer will list the type of oil they use for the forks and the shocks, and there is nothing wrong with staying with that oil. That being said, is there something to gain by using a less or more viscous oil in terms of better suspension action for the forks? It's an interesting question. Certainly there can be in some cases, depending on what you are doing with the bike. So we come into a theory and almost a religious debate over this next step. Shocks generally have one oil specified for them, and you really don't vary from that. Forks, however, because they are so big in terms of size, they take so much volume, there is air in there. There is a rationale that says, why not change the fork oil height so that you can manipulate the air gap if you're a little heavier, and you can therefore get better assistance from the forks against bottoming with a shorter air gap, provided that you don't lose travel. Is it wrong to suggest that you might go up from 5 to 7 weight for a set of forks so that the damping is slightly improved even though you haven't gone in and changed the valving shims? Some people would say that is heresy. For those of you that know the life of Brian and have enjoyed watching that, making such statements is akin to saying Jehovah. And fortunately, as it's the internet and you're just listening to this, I won't get stoned. And for those in America, no, that doesn't mean marijuana. There really is a very, very heated debate over using a slightly heavier or slightly thinner oil than originally came in the fork. Many people cannot afford $1,300 cartridges. I'd say very few can. Perhaps a larger number can afford a piston kit at $400 to $500. Again, many can't. Some who ride a bike just don't have the budget for that level of improvement. So, for the sake of, for example, in the US, a common price of $20 for fork oil, is it worth some experimentation? To me, it most certainly is, because you can get so much out of this that is in your favor, provided that you do it appropriately, you use the right methodology, and you come out with an end result where you still have full travel, you are not at the extreme end of adjustment, and the front end does what you want it to, both in cornering and acceleration. Great science requires you to question everything. So with fork oil, I would encourage you to do some reading and research as to what the brand is that is recommended, but then get onto Google and Google a oil viscosity chart for forks. There are a plethora of them. Go ahead and use those. See what oil is recommended. Look at the center Stokes number and look at the heat index numbers. Also, you can check the VI, viscosity index. There's a lot of data points that you can use there. If you are adamant about staying with what was recommended by the manufacturer, you can find that brand, you can find all the detailed information, and if you can't get that brand, you can then go ahead and look at what is available to you close to center Stokes and VI, and therefore get pretty much the same performance out of the fork. So, are you open to experimentation, testing, and learning? If so, there's a lot you can gain. If you are adamant that under no circumstances do you change, even remotely, beyond what the manufacturer states must go in that fork to that oil height, please honor your thinking. Do not experiment. But do change your fork and shock oil frequently.
Dave Moss can tune your suspension no matter where you are on the planet via his remote tuning service. Contact Dave on Facebook or by email, dave@davemosstuning.com.